So as they mentioned, my name's Andy Simpson. I work at VeriSign. Some of you may or may not know what we do. We sell domain names, not directly to end users. We sell exclusively through resellers, like a lot of you in the room, registrars. But we're the wholesale partner, primarily responsible for .com, .net. So that means that we're responsible for over 130 million domain names, which involves not just deciding who registers them when, but also responsible for resolving them. So I think some of the things that Sridhar was saying this morning about scale are really sort of core to our business as well, making sure that we can scale to the next 100 million. We currently serve up more than 1.5 billion queries per day in terms of resolutions for actual domain requests. But today I'm here to talk about online services and how they partner well with domain names. Because we know that ultimately most of you here in this room are selling services to end users who ultimately consume domain names. And we find that millions of the users who ultimately end up buying a domain name first enter the market looking to build a website. And so while there may be hundreds of millions of domains deployed, there may be tens of millions of domains sold every year, we wanted to focus some analysis in terms of when somebody attaches a service to their domain names, is there something distinct about what's happening there? And that's why this area where there's actual customer engagement, we believe tells us about exciting areas of growth in the market. And I'm going to do that today by talking about a lot of the places where drag and drop website builders are in use online, email services, and how a lot of this actually intersects with social and how end users are coming online today through that. And ultimately, after we look at some of the places where these services are being deployed, I'll be able to take a step back and talk about how they decide to buy domains, what they ultimately do during that decision-making process, and some of the characteristics that we see that are common in what they ultimately purchase. So, domains on website builders is really where I want to start today. This is an area that's been sort of important to my research and VeriSign's as well, because they're changing the way that people come online slightly, right? Ultimately today there's millions of domains on what we like to refer to as the drag and drop website builders. These are the places where people can go in, simply get an account and start throwing content around. And we understand that a lot of these services provide the back end for building websites that even developers are using on the WordPress platform and so on and so forth. So we wanted to look, are the domains that people who use website builders using different from the rest of the world? Now, I mentioned that they're changing the way that people are coming online slightly, and this is the new life cycle that we see people coming online at. Ultimately, rather than coming in with an idea and finding a place to put it by buying a domain name, users are coming online yearning to develop content and build a website and see what it looks like before they ultimately decide where it goes. So they'll approach a service that enables them to do that, register as a user, start developing some content, putting in contact information, and ultimately decide if they like what they see before they buy a domain name, which now happens usually around the premium subscription phase. When we look at the website builder drag and drop market today, we see that there's roughly 10 million subscribers who have already purchased a domain name, happening after that conversion step, after they go through the process of developing content. So how do we get the data that we're going to study, right? So, they mentioned my role as a data scientist. I've been with VeriSign for the better part of the last 13 years. And I've sort of worked through our organization, developing from the bottom up, right, our stack for collecting, storing, analyzing, and ultimately visualizing and using to make decisions data. And the core of where we start the analysis that we're working with today is all publicly available data. We ultimately use zone files to decide what to crawl. We actually send out a crawler and visit the websites, and we build models based off of the returns, right? So we're actually trying to learn what various services that are installed on domain names look like from a web crawler's perspective, which DNS records are associated with which vendors, which HTML references, tags, all of the above, right? These are the sort of things that we build our models to recognize. And today I'll do a little bit beyond that in terms of how we apply that to look at regional trends. The regionalization that we do today is based off of where the reseller, the registrar of the domain names, is ultimately located. Obviously, there's lots of ways to determine where the end registrant of a domain name lies. Some of you may be familiar with the Whois protocol, but ultimately where we sit, we're a thin registry, so all we really know is the reseller that we sold it to out of roughly 1,400 or so different accredited registrars, which one actually sold the domain and where are they based. So I'll have some data on India-specific registrars later in the deck, and this is how we're doing it. So I mentioned that we're at roughly 10 million domains on drag-and-drop website builders today, and you might ask, why do I care so much about that? And I think this ultimately summarizes why. This has been the growth of the market for the past 3 years. Right? So when we look back to January of 2015, we saw that the base was just around 6.5 million. And as we started getting into the ability, after the first year, we started compiling the CAGR rate here, which is the growth rate of the number of customers who are online because of or using a website builder product, and we find that on average it's growing roughly 20% per year. This significantly outpaces the domain industry growth as a whole. Right? The domain industry growth as a whole grew last year, the GTLD space, roughly 8% year over year. Okay? So this 20% growth rate is driving a lot of what we see bringing users online right now, and that's an important area for us to understand. Now, you may ask the question, what are these users ultimately buying? And so we do take a step back, and it's not necessarily surprising as of yet that a significant majority of the customers who come through the process of actually intending to build a website when they come online buy what they recognize. Right? When we look at what users today in the internet industry recognize when they think about domain names from a GTLD perspective, com and net have the broadest global awareness. So if they're aware of something, they understand it, and they're willing to buy it. And the com brand carries across the globe, across all regions. So back to sort of some of the learnings from what we came to understand from understanding a little more about that 10 million. One of the big questions that I sought to answer when I looked at this problem initially was, are builders providing the ability for people who already own domains, who had no idea what to do with them, but just bought something that they really liked, to build content, to go ahead and add a website where they previously felt it was too challenging to go ahead and build one? And the good news is, yes, sometimes, and potentially from at least VeriSign's perspective, the even better news is not always, right? So what you see here is the number of new premium subscribers that we see on the drag and drop vendors on a quarterly basis. You can see that on the right there, we've got over 1 million new users subscribing to the premium services in a single quarter. And the percentages on top of these bars represent what percentage of those users ultimately also purchased a domain name. And you'll see that that number is roughly consistent, right around 70%. So that means 30% of these subscribers are people who ultimately had a place to put their web content and decided to go ahead and subscribe to a builder service. And the other 70% were effectively attracted to our industry by the ease of use of leveraging one of these products. And so that's a win-win from my perspective. It's both helping people who had the product get more use out of it and also bringing more in. So this was ultimately good news. So the next thing we wanted to do was sort of understand who is satisfying the different needs of different markets around the world. And the top global players are big brand names that everybody knows, right? Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, WordPress. These are big names that everybody knows and understands. But when we actually look who's more likely to come through the registrars that are based here in Asia, we found that Alibaba, Wix, and Weebly were the top 3 in terms of actually deploying services in this market. But then when we look a little bit lower, we find that there are additional builders which focus more on a smaller customer base, but tailoring their experience to the market where they want to actually grow their base. And we see players like Now Floats, which is a startup here in India, SharePoint, which is just ultimately seems to appeal more to some of the services that are being sold here in Asia, Odoo, and strikingly, where the registrars that sell these services are disproportionately based in this market. So website builders aren't the only thing that we sell and use domain names for. I think one of the things that's sort of exciting from my standpoint is that the domain name is ultimately just a way of connecting together the services that you sell. Right? Here we are at CloudBazaar. Obviously, a domain name is part of the solution that you sell, but ultimately, you have the opportunity to sell all of these products that exist on the peripheries of a domain, and the domain ultimately provides the conduit to connect these services together. So you can see, we've heard from Google today, we've heard from others who, and we will continue to hear from others who offer hosting in the cloud, and give you the opportunity to ultimately use infrastructure, which a domain connects you to from a back-end perspective. But another area where people are sort of don't think about as much is that the social side of things, right? That a domain can actually connect you to your social feed. Right, so we sort of tried to enumerate some of the ways that these connections are made, right? I think the more obvious ones here are that somebody's going to put an A record down on their DNS configuration. It's going to go to an IP address, which ultimately resolves to a website. Yes, okay, I think everybody knows that. MX is going to help you direct your mail. If you're going a little bit more advanced or providing email automation solutions, marketing, third-party marketing, you may be needing to configure TXT records in order to enable SPF or DMARC or some of these other more secure mail protocols. But the social is something that people can ultimately link to from their website. And having attended quite a few events in the past year, I was really struck when I was in New York a couple of months ago at an event called Name Summit, where they had some individuals from SEMPO, which is the Search Engine Marketing Professionals organization, up on stage. And one of the biggest challenges that they talked about for brands and individuals in developing their presence online right now is actually consolidating their presence, right? Ultimately, brands want to be and need to be everywhere. They need people to understand, though, that the message they put in each of these different markets is the same entity. And how they connect that is ultimately something that the website provides the ability to do. So in order to quantify that, I wanted to take a step back and talk about, very specifically. I mentioned I'd go into the India registrar numbers. And here's just a couple of factoids that we pulled in order to talk about this, right? There's over 113,000 domains today that are linking to SSL parts of their website from when we look at the domain base from the India registrars. More than 3 million, though, have email configured on them. And I'm going to talk about a couple of vendors we see that are popular for email configuration here in just a moment. But one of the bigger areas that we wanted to highlight here is actually that social up in the upper right. Right, so there's more than 600,000 domains in this base that have references from their website to a social profile. And I want to be clear, this is a little bit more than just a like us on or a generic sort of tracker. This is an actual link from a website off to a social media profile. Right? This is going to be somewhere where they have actually developed their page, their bio, whatever it may be in the social space. And what you don't see on this slide, right, are some of the more nuanced data points, right? There's roughly 200,000 of those 600,000 that reference Facebook. Facebook is the dominant social media network that everybody is referencing from their website. They drive you into their business page on Facebook. However, the other 400,000 are actually even more exciting. These are people who link multiples. So the majority of these, more than 60% of people who reference a social profile use their website to reference 2 or more social profiles. Right? This is where the utility of a website comes back in. As businesses and consumers are managing their presence on multiple social networks, addressing the various audiences that are unique to each of these, and trying to cater a message to those audiences, the domain provides that consolidation point that the individuals at SEMPO were pointing out is a big challenge for businesses, right? So if you want people to be able to find you forever, right, after the social media network has evolved away, right, and we still see people referencing their MySpace profiles on their domains today, but ultimately the social space is ever evolving, right? One of the biggest trends we've seen throughout the course of 2017 is additional businesses referencing their Instagram accounts. Instagram has been growing almost double over the past couple of quarters in terms of the number of domains who actually reference their profiles there. So that's a fast-growing space, and only through having an actual domain and website to help your users find your new presence are you able to actually sort of make those ties. So I mentioned that since there was roughly 3 million domains that had mail services, that we would dig into that a little bit more. We wanted to compare the relative distribution of services. Two big ones. This is Google and Office 365. Mostly, this is really the G Suite and Office 365. And we wanted to just show that these are the relative install rates of the various services by registrar country. It's sort of obvious, at least from here, that the most popular product across these different markets observed here was G Suite. The deployment rates here are in the neighborhood of 6 to 7%. So the largest bars are that 6 to 7%, and you can see, Office 365 right now, and at least in these markets, is really only being sold aggressively in Singapore and Taiwan, at least from what we can see from an instrumentation standpoint. And again, from a methodology standpoint, this is looking at the actual MX records configured on the domain names as observed by our crawlers. So, we've talked a lot about some of the places where services are installed on domain names. What's unique when somebody ultimately pays more, right? I think most of the people here care mostly about when people are actually subscribing to incremental services and not just buying domain names. So if there is something distinctive about the type of domains that people are attracted to when they're willing to pay for incremental services, that would be useful insight. Right? So we took a look back at our data from 2016, which encompassed roughly 35 million active registrations in .com and .net. Okay, those are new units that we sold in that year. Okay, those are publicly disclosed numbers we release every quarter, and once a year we give this annual number, which is 35 million. One of the most exciting things about that, from my perspective, is that 70% of what we sold in that year was completely new, never been registered before. Okay. Some of you may or may not be aware, there's a major opportunity to register domain names that have previously been used, and we do see a high demand for names that are expiring. So when a name expires, it goes back to the market. There's a lot of competition for who's going to get those names that were once registered before. So there's a lot of attention in the industry that's paid for, how do you get those names that are dropping? But ultimately, most of the growth that we as an industry are seeing is coming from things that people never thought to register before. It's not from reuse, it's not from dropping names, it's from creativity and what ultimately end users are thinking to register. So how does that work, right? What is it that people are able to find? You've probably heard things like, availability names are scarce, it's hard to find good ones. So we wanted to sort of give some more color behind that to sort of make it clear, right? There's a lot of good names that people are finding on a regular basis. And when we looked at the overall composition of the gross ads in 2016, we found that roughly 45% of all of those 35 million names registered were what we call keyword exclusive domains. So just pause on this slide for just 1 second. I want to explain terminology. What we consider a keyword domain name is basically one where we can go beginning to end using only keywords, right? Only words. There's no letters. There's very few, certainly no non-standard abbreviations. And that's ultimately what makes a keyword domain. We have a few other classifications which we use to just help understand growth. We saw a lot of activity in what we consider the chip space, Chinese premium names in 2015 to early 2016. But the two primary categories where we see people registering names are in that keyword segment and also what we consider the combination. This is where people are substituting a number or adding an abbreviation, making up a word, getting creative. So when we come back here and we show, okay, so the keyword names make up 45%. The green bars show that when somebody is using a third-party builder service, they are significantly more likely to register a keyword-exclusive domain name. Upwards of almost 60% of the time, when somebody goes and pays incremental dollars to actually build a website and pay for services, they're buying keyword domain names. And you're going to say, well, aren't all the dictionary words taken? How is that really possible? So we did a little bit further analysis to say, okay, so let's look at the 2016 registrations that were keywords and break those down again, right? And this is the iterative process of data science from my perspective. It's going through the data, and basically every time you find an answer, there's another question. And the next question helps you take the next step, do additional analysis, and this is what ultimately leads you to the through the decision-making process. So when we did the analysis, we found that in the aggregate 2016 registration base, 42%, the highest overall category, were 3-word domain names. And you may be saying, okay, all right, 3-word domain names, what does that actually look like? So if you guys are with me still today, you can open up your booklets, the beautiful booklets that came with the event. And on the second to last page, page 23, at the very, very bottom, there's a great example of what we would consider at least a 3-word domain name. It's indiaelectronicsweek.com. That's sort of a good example of what a 3-word domain name looks like to us. And you know, these are good names from my perspective because they're descriptive. It's pretty clear what you're going to find when you go to a domain like that. They're easy to remember, and it doesn't really matter how long or short they are. They're just 3 words. 3 words almost makes up a sentence. And we did find that when we looked, again, double-clicking at the actual end-user space, the customers of the builders who are already more likely to buy keyword domain names were even more likely to go for 3- and 4-word domain names. So they're ultimately willing to go to that extent. The only thing that limits them in terms of being able to find the 3- and 4-word keyword domain names that they can use and be successful marketing is their own creativity. So ultimately, you know, when a business comes online and is trying to think about how they want to name themselves, where they want to put their content, there's a lot of things that they have to consider, right? And we have marketing and business development groups at VeriSign which are aggressively researching how people go through this overall process. And these are just 3 of the concerns that businesses who are coming online think about when they want to come up with a name for their business. And through that analysis, we found that there's 4 basic strategies to picking a good domain name when a customer is actually trying to come up with a creative way to bring people in to see their content. So, memorable, suggestive, these are combinations of words. These are the techniques that we saw most commonly using when they wanted to come up with a good name for themselves. And so so that led VeriSign to go ahead and make the decision to build a service which is open for anybody here, or really anybody in the world, to go ahead and use, which takes advantage of the machine learning, the learned processes over time that we've built to take in what a consumer thinks they want to register, which may or may not be available, break it up into the discrete ideas that they're expressing through their desire when they think about registration, which is that segment, the user's input section on the left there. Ultimately, run it through rules that anybody who's a consumer of our API can configure on their own, and then return suggestions, which ultimately improves conversion rate for customers who see that the name that they can use is actually available, helping them get over that hurdle of, I want to get my stuff online, I can't find the name that I want. This helps them solve that problem very quickly. For anybody who wants to subscribe to this, it's a REST-based API. I'll have a reference to it on my last slide in case you're interested in it. You can chat with me, and I can get you in touch with our various biz dev people who do that work. But ultimately, we do see that end users are coming online, and domain names are an important component of how they connect all the services that they need and are willing to pay for. It's an important step in the customer evolution process. And once they get that domain, it's a lot easier to bridge from one service to the next. If you go back to that graphic where I was showing the various connections between the different services, once you have that domain figured out in the middle, it's a lot easier to move across to the other segments where there's a lot of additional value that you can extract out of individual customers. And if you have a desire to use tools that we've developed based off of our learned models over time, namesuggestion.com is a way that you can do that. This is a service that we've invested a lot in On our side, you will see us continuing to invest in it as we add additional language support, additional contextual references within locations, and you'll even see that over the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to go through a complete rebranding of name suggestion, and this is probably the last time that we'll use that name on stage. Ultimately, you'll see in the next couple of weeks, we'll release it again as Name Studio, as a way of enhancing, rolling out the API support for resellers like yourselves to interact with it and get it so that you can help your customers see which names are going to be valuable for them. So look for that in the next couple of coming weeks. I've kind of lost track of where we are in terms of timing for the event. If we have time to take questions, I can always take them. Otherwise, I'm here for the rest of the day, and I'm happy to meet anybody who I can while I'm here. So it's been a real honor to get to take the stage with you all today. So thank you very much.
Well, if you do have any questions for him, I'm sure you can connect with him offline. We're going to be breaking for networking lunch powered by .biz and .co. I'd like to tell you that the more sessions that you attend, the more your chances are to win a lot of prizes. So all you have to do is attend our sessions. Also, apart from gaining insights, I hope you know that if you have to win the iPhone 8, you have to be present here. So it's not just about getting your stamps and then giving us your Apple flyer, but you have to be present here in person to win it. Please do join us for lunch. We'll see you back by 1:30 if possible for our next session. Thank you.